Okay, so welcome to part 2, where we're very much this is an opportunity to continue this process of kind of a collective exploration of the relationship between the life of an artist and the life of a Buddhist practitioner. So this is I invite you to if you have any observations or questions, it would be very helpful just to continue that. If those of you who are online, if you could put your question into the chat box and Michael can feed them back to me. So that's the way we're going to do that. So,
I've got a question.
Have you?
I wanted to ask you, of the pictures you have here, which is the dearest to your heart and why? Maybe you could get hold of it.
Yeah, well, so you want me to pick it up?
Do you want me to grab it while you speak?
It's the one on the far end, actually. Okay, so so the question for those of you online, if you didn't catch it, the question was of the paintings that I brought in today, which one is kind of closest, dearest to my heart? So it's interesting because each of the paintings comes from a slightly different phase of my own life. But this one, I describe it as he. He used to live at the end of my bed, and he actually started life as a piece of a boat that had been broken apart by a storm, and so this kind of bit I found on a beach. I think it was somewhere in Norfolk, actually, but and at that time, when I was working with a lot of found material, and what it was that I was interested in the relationship between the body and the piece of art. So at that time, I was reading all this stuff about the Kabbalah and the kind of ways, measurements, the sort of sacred measurements, and I'd spent quite a bit of time at Chartres Cathedral, which, as some of you will know, sort of laid out according to particular measurements. The whole structure is based upon measurements which you can relate back to the human form or the ideal human form. So it's a fascinating kind of mathematical structure as well as a principal place of sacred, the presence of the sacred. Anyway, so I was very interested in the relationship between the body and the object that I was working on. And I very much saw quite quickly that this central section was really the torso. And I think, without wanting to sort of too literalize it, as I started to sort of add pieces to it and start to bring in different shapes onto the surface. So the way I used to work, I'd spend quite a lot of time just with these pieces of material and just sit with them. And I tried to kind of feel into the surface to know where to place the mark. So it was a kind of process of divination, really. And then gradually the form would start to kind of emerge, or the imagery would start to emerge. If it got too kind of explicit, I would tend to then get some sandpaper and just rub it all off. If it was getting too conceptually, it was becoming too much of a clear narrative. So it was a bit of a strange process. inevitably things do start to sort of fall into place. And there's something about working in that way which I really like. It was important that these objects already had their own history. So it was the engagement between I used to spend an awful lot of time in skips, as you can imagine, kind of finding, well, actually, again, I would try to divine these meetings. So, I just walked the streets. I used to go down to London. I lived, at this time, I was living actually in Essex, but I think this was even earlier. Anyway, this thing of kind of trying to just feel into the environment so that the next piece of material would come to me. So I was really keen to allow the piece of material to come to me. So this piece came, and then these other bits started to emerge. And of course, you can't but start to have some sort of stories that emerge around it. But why it was so important, I think, was it actually used to have some strands of red wool that came down. And when I put those strands of wool on, they touched the earth, and it was as if the being at that point came alive. And so there was a real sense of living with this presence. And I kind of feel he's quite a protector, actually, for me, has been quite a protector. So I feel very blessed to have you in my life, this being. So that's completely nuts on one level. I accept that. And it has some sort of poetic truth to it. We're not taking it too literally, but just very much feeling connection to the energies in the world, and particularly these sort of beneficent energies that one can lean into, draw on. Michael?
Yeah, there's a comment from Tim Mason, Bhadra. Tim says,
what are you on about?
He did write that and then he deleted it. What he's put now is, I immediately saw your protector as a matador.
Oh.
Let's comment on that.
Well, that's interesting. Thanks, Tim. It's not something that I kind of recognise, but that would a matador. When I hear the word of matador, it's kind of got the red cloak, hasn't it? So there's something about that and the dance with the red cloak. But I'll just leave that comment sitting there, I think, Tim, if that's all right. I kind of appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhadra.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was interested in the comment you made about tribal art.
Yeah.
Because I know when I went to art school, it was the late 80s.
Right.
So tribal art had had a rethink at that time.
Absolutely, yeah.
And there was a huge exhibition. I don't know if I saw it. I think I read about it. There's a huge exhibition in London of all these pieces, and I think particularly now because there'll be. I don't know what's happening in the art world in London, but I'm sure there's a lot more African art coming through and really progressive as well, which links in with tribal art, with the more traditional African art. So because there's we're an incredibly multicultural society, and we have so many more people in the country from Africa more recently. So I can really see that connection. Like I can see the influences of the tribal art and some of your work here. So and I certainly I think some of the what I found because I've had a particular training, I think it's a very particular training at art school.
Yeah.
I think in the early days when I was first involved with Tree Ratner, it didn't really resonate with some of Banfi's thoughts around art didn't resonate with my own education in art college. So I struggled with that a bit. But it's not something I've, sort of parked it really. It's not really something I thought about too much. So, but now, part of the reason I come today is because I'm really interested in how art and Buddhism does work together. And I think I have seen them as slightly separate things, because I almost feel that the sort of Sangharakshita teaching around art doesn't really link with my own experience particularly. Right. Yeah, so it's interesting to talk about that.
Thank you. I'm kind of, in terms of, I'm not sure there's a question in that. I think it sounds more like a kind of curious, a statement of kind of an observation, and I'm not sure.
Yeah. And it's not a criticism.
No.
It's just like it is. It's just something I remember thinking, and I think at that point I was okay. Well, this is my art practice, my meditation practice. Yeah. And I've probably kept them quite separate. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is how to link them. And I think, as I say, I think it is about, for me, it's more about the quality of attention that we bring to our Buddhist practice and to our art practice, which is maybe where we can start to bring those two worlds together. I think in terms of the product, again, I really think the product is secondary. And I suppose one of the things that you're kind of pointing to in a way is that aesthetics and cultural references are always going to be in transition. Yeah. And hopefully, new ideas. Yes. Yeah. So that's kind of, and I think that's what hopefully keeps art alive as well, isn't it? That it's a constantly unfolding process. And unfortunately, the products that we come to know and experience are partly the products of the influence of power, of wealth, of kind of which are things which if we don't attend to those with sensitivity, it will affect our views. So I think it's quite important in our appreciation of art and also our appreciation of Buddhism is to recognize that what we're being offered and presented tends to come through filters of certainly an aesthetic filter, but probably a linguistic filter. The texts that we're given been written down within a particular culture. They've then been translated into another culture, and our understanding of those terms, or certainly some of the terms of the early translations of the Dharma, have been shown to be completely incorrect because the translator didn't have sufficient experiential practice of the Dharma to understand what these terms were alluding to. So this sort of process of translation and refining of or kind of holding what is offered and presented loosely, I think is really important, so that we don't create that split in ourselves and saying that somehow art has to be over there and Buddhism has to be here. We want to, I certainly feel it's very important that we do the work of translation ourselves, to develop that capacity to hold things, as I think I said near the beginning, hold things poetically rather than literally. And I think it's a very important part. We could say quite, one of the great values of Sangharakshita as a teacher is he was a great translator and a kind of great, his capacity to weave together
different traditions, different times in the kind of cultural history of Buddhism is incredible. But that has to continue to kind of unfold, or we need to look at that with a slightly, well, with an eye or an ear to recognise that he too is bound within a framework of cultural references.
Sorry, if you're going to speak, can you get in the mic? It's just that people at home won't be able to hear you.
Well, we could check that. Is there any responses to?
There's a response to you, to your talk from Jane. It's not so much a question, but it's a response. If you want me to read it out, or do you want to?
Just rather than carry on the conversation, we'll come to you, Jane, shortly. But just want to check whether or not could then, if somebody's visible online, could you just put your hand up just to let us know if you can hear when somebody's speaking in the room?
Can you hear the questioner? Could you indicate? Emma, is that Emma's going?
Yeah, I don't think you can. My experience is
No.
something like you need to be near a mic.
Maureen's shaking her head.
Okay, all right. Well, that's a great shame.
But that's something we've done. So.
Yeah.
So how can we? Let's
I
see.
think it's easiest if people come towards the mic, Bhadra, and you'll be too far away from it.
Okay.
The general consensus seems to be just about.
All right.
I think it would be easier if you moved forward rather than moving the mic, because then we won't be able to hear you better. So that's right.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. For those of you not in the room, this is one of the technical issues that we're working with. So, sorry.
That's it. I'm so sorry.
I was just going to add that I really recommend this introduction that Divan wrote to the newer edition, the 2010 edition of The Religion of Art. It's 20 pages long, and what he does is a very skillful, it's not just a summary, but it's also a critique. And I think he's speaking to some of these issues that you've been talking about.
Okay.
And it's quite helpful, I think, at getting at what I think is what you could say is kind of deeper principial points that Sangharakshita is making, and kind of teasing out some of these more kind of culturally painful things that don't sit very well with us now.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. Okay. So I have a question from Jane. I understand.
A comment from Jane. I'll read it out. Before I do that, Jim has asked, so this is asking people in the room, would it be good to have a pan shot when someone else is speaking, so to see who is questioning? If you're happy with that. If you're not, then that's fine.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Anyway, we'll see if there's another question. But I'll read out what Jane has said. It's comments. So, from Jane, thank you for your explaining your connection in both art and meditation as similar processes, states of consciousness. I connected to my own past as an artist and how art has to involve your spirituality, as the process is a magnet to your inner consciousness. As you spoke, Bhadra, I reflected on some of my observations of young children's art and their primal need for mark making, and the process as being key to share their inner consciousness and understanding, often sharing that with little language. Unfortunately, when adults assume or interfere or label their marks they put down, it puts a barrier up to their inner consciousness and their spirituality. That's very similar to us as adults trying to pinpoint and label the process for ourselves as we live in an outcome world, outcome in inverted commas, outcome orientated world, and all the interference and barriers posed to us. Art allows us to go back to our primitive states and explore our inner world, just as meditation does. Thank you, Bhadra, for a thought-provoking interview into your Buddhist and artistic life. You have inspired me to find my old artworks.
Great, thank you, Jane.
I would echo that, because I know Jane teaches. I teach as well. I would echo that from my own experience in teaching. Also, I don't know about other people, if anyone's had that experience of when they were at school of being told either by your teacher or by the pupil sat next to you who you think's your friend, that's no good. Or sometimes your own self, you look at the person next to you and you think that's good, mine's rubbish. And that was a really prevalent thing that I grew up with, that mine was rubbish. And because it was labelled by either myself or a peer or a teacher as not being the outcome really good. So they never touched the inner process. Yeah. And that's not as prevalent now in teaching, but it is important still.
Definitely. Thanks, Michael, for your honesty there. So let's just check this out in the room. So who has sat down to meditate and thought, as they're sitting there meditating, think, everybody else is having a blissful experience and I'm sitting here, I can't meditate, I'm rubbish at meditating.
Some hands went up.
So there is something about this comparison and judgment on ourselves and others that really blocks our capacity, as James, the natural capacity of the maker is such an important aspect of our being, I think. And as Jane was saying there, it's actually, it really helps us to understand and know ourselves, the mark making or the music making or the word crafting. It allows ourselves to become visible to ourselves. And this is such an important part of practice, that we meditate to know ourselves more deeply, to know, to tune in to the world as it really is, and ourselves within it. So that's an important part of making. So is there anything else that...
Can I just ask you, Bhadra, what attracts you to wood? Because you may not be able to tell the people online, but all of these pictures are on wood.
Well, as I say, I think I particularly like wood, partly because I use pieces of wood that have already had a life. And the pieces that seem to come visible are, it might be a desktop or a piece behind Janaka. That piece there was actually it was on eBay. I got on Romney Marsh in Kent. There was somebody who bought a whole load of timber, gutted this Edwardian sort of pleasure boat somewhere was being dismantled. So there was all this kind of internal cladding on this boat, these huge lumps of wood, and it was just incredible kind of gift. But so I use wood, or why I'm attracted to wood is that it tends to already have some life to it. So it's a matter of engaging with that life that's already there, and it's that sort of dialogue. But also, I think I quite like the tradition. If you look at an old icon, the icons were on wood panels, which were then rabbit skin glue and gesso. They really built up this kind of base, so the colours would really kind of live through the whiteness. The white of the base would live through the colour. So there's something about just the kind of appreciating there's something about the kind of living quality to wood, which I think canvas for me doesn't quite. It feels like it's that horror of the blank piece of paper when you turn the page of the sketchbook. Oh, it's too much, isn't it, somehow? So, I think it's an easier transition into sort of mark making if you're just, you've already got something there that you're working with. So, I don't know if there's any questions, but essentially, yes.
I know grace is something that interests you, Bhadra. I wondered if you could say something about the grace of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas.
Definitely, yes. So, before I made contact with Buddhism, as I say, when I was sort of getting towards an end of a piece of artwork, when I could start to see the surface was really becoming alive and vibrant, I felt as if I was receiving some, I just felt bliss, which I translated into this concept of grace from the Christian tradition. But it's as if something descends into me, into any of us. So there's just this very kind of these sort of peak experiences. And when I came into contact with Buddhism, it actually took me quite a long while to know that so there you are, there was a little bit of grace just descended into the room. Somebody's phone was singing a little song to us. But, to come back to, so when I started getting involved in Buddhism, I actually found it quite difficult to feel that kind of flow of energy from these forms, from these images of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But then I heard or I read called the Sutra of Golden Light. And in the Sutra of Golden Light, it talks about, it has this image of a drum being beaten in the universe, this golden drum that beats, and it sends these kind of rays of golden light down into the world, into us, and those rays of light transform us, purify our being. And when I read that, I could finally sort of relax and recognize that it was possible to stay with Buddhism because there was a place for this sense of energy that was coming from somewhere beyond oneself. And that really continues to be an important part of practice, really, to recognize that this kind of self-enclosed system can really be softened and opened by allowing in the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So I find that very important, and I think particularly when I was sort of coming towards getting to the point of ordination, we have this process of where you're asked to kind of feel into what is the Buddha figure, the particular Buddha figure that you have a particular response to or kind of relationship with. And I thought I kind of was sort of wondering about this question, and I really wanted this fantastic figure of Vajra Yogini. It was this kind of naked, wrathful female figure surrounded by fire. It was going to be a fantastic relationship. But actually, as I got nearer to ordination, I was really disappointed because this other presence became visible to me, which was Akshobhya. I thought, oh God, that's so boring. Akshobhya, it's just got to sit here and kind of be non-reactive and kind of really kind of opening up to that kind of witnessing, allowing the sort of one being to become a mirror, really, without being, just allowing whatever's arising to be present. But actually, I now find with Akshobhya that that grace really of Akshobhya, particularly when I'm reach very low points in my experience, out of nowhere, Akshobhya is there. And I know I'm loved by Akshobhya. And that is just very, well, it's just so relieving. So there's something about grace which I think is so important in that sense of recognizing that love, these deeper forces are always present and available. And it's only my own kind of, when I grip and tighten around a big sense of myself, particularly when it's bound up in negative mental states, when I'm kind of get locked, self-enclosed in that sort of system, then I feel, very blessed on occasions that is just kind of dissolved by the love of Akshobhya, which I experience as grace. So that's why I thought it was important to, it feels very connected to art in a way that I feel that art is, in a way, engaging in a state of grace, that we're just receiving this knowing, which doesn't come from us, it's not something we know, it's as if it kind of comes into being on its own terms, in its own way. I think there's numerous examples from, not only from art, but from science, where people's lives generally, where you're struggling with a problem, you're trying to resolve something, think something through, get an answer to a question that you have, and then you just relax. You might go to sleep. The classic thing is you wake up the next morning and you know exactly the answer to that which you've been grappling with, or you're just kind of in some reflective, open space, and these answers seem to come into our awareness. And I kind of feel that kind of quality is something that it is. Well, I would describe that as grace. Gifted these jewels of knowing, of seeing. So, and where's quite a lot, I've been talking quite a long time now. I'm just wondering whether that's enough for everybody. Looks like that's yes, been once more. Okay, I'm just going to end then with another poem, I think, and then Nick will play us some music to settle our being, or maybe not. Okay, why am I going to read this? Okay, so the reason I'm going to be reading this is that it's an attitude to experience, which I think is absolutely crucial for our lives. It's an attitude of love, passionate love towards our experience as it is. So I think it's absolutely crucial for art making and for meditation practice, that we really love what is actually present. And it's called Worn to Shreds by Kissing. The black image framed in silver, worn to shreds by kissing. The black image framed in silver, worn to shreds by kisses. Framed in silver, the black image worn to shreds by kisses. Framed in silver, the black image worn to shreds by kisses. And all around the image, the very metal worn to shreds by kisses. Framed in metal, the black image worn to shreds by kisses. The darkness, oh, that darkness, worn to shreds by kisses. The darkness in our eyes, worn to shreds by kisses. All that we wished for, worn to shreds by kisses. And all we never wished for, kissed and worn to shreds by kisses. All we escaped, worn to shreds by kisses. And all we wish for, kissed again and again.